Chapter 1, Part 2. The station billboards that hosted such works of advertising had presented Fred with terror. They were all empty. No, it can't be. I've been away from the station no less than 10 minutes and it's gone. No, Fred angrily said to one of the billboards. Passing by was one of the station attendees. Dressed in a navy blue to what seemed to be uniform, they silently carried out their work, paying no mind to the commuters making their life that little bit more difficult. Fred had approached a young man dressed in such a uniform and noticed him lip-syncing some song blaring from his small in-ear headphones. "Excuse me," Fred said, moving his head and neck into the private space of air near the young man's head. The young man finished lip-syncing the last silent sentence of his song and gently pulled an earphone from his ear. "You alright, mate?" the young man asked. "I'm looking for a poster that was here roughly 10 to 15 minutes ago. It was something about a moon." Fred asked, in anticipation of good news. How presumptuous. "Yeah, we had to clear 'em out. I made some new ones. Want to see it or something?" asked the young man with a blank face. Fred had developed a short smile, one you would usually see on someone that was impatient and was hiding their flared anger. "Yes, please, if possible," Fred responded. With that short smile, Fred showed some teeth. A painter of portraits would suggest a softer smile, but for some reason, every second that passed without seeing that poster caused Fred to become filled with rage. This was no simple rage. It was different from anger in a way of which it could only be dismantled by saying it was a mix of emotions that had reached a conclusion or showing of rage, but held itself within the confines of social law. Unbound, this emotion would look like insanity. In fact, it could be labelled as insanity, but Fred was, in nature, a very controlled man, albeit his emotions were worn like a piece of clothing in a manner that everyone could see his emotion, but it never unwrapped itself to be destructive or chaotic. The young man had a very slow walk, combined with a fashionable limp that most young men adorned. "His pace is infuriating," thought Fred. Then it silently crept on him, like a feeling of momentum travelling up his back to turn into an uncomfortable itch under the earlobe. Fred's erratic behaviour and his uncontrollable and mixed emotions finally made themselves available for reflection. Fred slowed his walking pace behind the young man. His head slumped in a disappointed manner, and his expression drooped. For the last 15 minutes, Fred had lost control. He knew it, he felt it, and in the light projections of himself in reflective surfaces, he could see it. Fred stopped himself from walking further, and let the young man carry on walking. Turning around, he made his way back to the platform to catch the next train to his workplace. Fred had managed to reach his platform and stood waiting for his train before he saw the young man turn around in disbelief and confusion. With an upward sway of his arms and a silent pairing of swear words, he began his slow walk back to where he was previously on the platform. Fred checked the time on a digital clock available at the platform and agreed to himself he would be 15 minutes late. He had calmed down, become a blank slate, and internally was disappointed with his actions. He felt the uncomfortable and odourless smell of desperation. A desperation for attachment or some form of intimacy or connection of some kind that reached further than a greeting of small talk. He couldn't quite grasp this need for a connection, but the closest connection he felt was with that darned moon. However, even that connection was something that Fred knew didn't exist. It was just something he told himself to make him feel like he had a hold to keep himself pushing forward in the world. The walk to his workplace was quieter than usual. His lateness had brought some comfort, but at the same time the silence brought him more inward, and the disappointment of his behaviour swelled at his temples. The Zorga International building was to anyone new a sight to behold. The shape looked more like a dog chew, and that is why it brought such amazement, because of the twists and turns of the glass and cement. The glass turntable doors swished and swooshed with every entry and exit. Entering the building, Fred lifted his head and the badge under his trench coat and looked in the security's direction. Security looked at him with familiar eyes, but had a question in their expression. "They said you'd be sick today, Mr. Summers," said one of the security guards. The man, tall in stature, had soft eyes, with interrogating eyebrows, and an upper lip that didn't quite close, because of the two front teeth trying to leave his face. "I just took a few tablets. I'd rather be at work anyway," Fred said with a reluctant smile. The security guard with interrogating eyebrows lifted them up gently in an "oh" moment and gestured Fred through the barriers blocking entry to the lift and stairwell. Fred took his face and aimed it towards the marble-tiled floor, not escaping his reflection wherever he looked or aimed his face. He accepted his feelings and let out a sigh. "I forgot how shiny this building is. Hope they're paying the cleaners enough," thought Fred. He waited patiently at the lift, occasionally looking up to see the numbers descending from 26 to 15 to 7 to 4, then 3, then 2, and finally the doors opened with a microwave ding. As the doors opened, Fred had to evolve his blank yet negative face to someone happy and yet serious at the same time. It didn't surprise him to find his manager standing at the very back of the lift alone, with crossed arms and an expression that expressed "what the hell." Fred knew that expression all too well. He had pulled the same face at his own underlings. His manager was an older woman, to which Fred would guess to be in her mid-40s. She had shoulder-length, thick brown blonde mixed hair, with a strand or two of grey acting as curtain liners on the hair tucked behind her rather small ears. She was at least 5 foot in height, and wore large round glasses that occasionally slipped down her symmetrical but buttoned nose. Her eyes expressed a fiery nature, and her mouth looked zipped tight, almost like she was holding in all her thoughts and feelings. Wearing a black pencil skirt with a soft grey turtleneck jumper and dark black heels that gave her an average height look. "Well?" she said, interrupting the lift doors as they tried to close. "Not entirely sure how to answer that one, Rita," Fred replied. "Well, are you sick or not? I need to know, Fred. I can't arrange cover, then just immediately get rid of it. It makes me look like a moron," Rita replied. "I think I've answered that one, Rita. I'm here," Fred replied sarcastically, gently opening up his arms to suggest his existence. Rita gave Fred a reached and a soft slap at the back of his head. "You're lucky you're good at your job, you sarcastic bastard. In future, can you call me if you change your mind? We had cover on its way, and I'm pretty sure they will want us to cover the travel expenses now," Rita said, in a friendly tone. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." Fred bowed and put on a short smile, a genuine one this time. They both took the elevator to the second floor, where immediately they entered a large conference-looking room with a large solid oak table shining with laminate. Swivel chairs that were all adorned in piano black wheels, and ceramic mugs with Zorga logos shining from the lights of the solid white from above. In the room, all the swivel chairs apart from two were taken up by young and optimistic-looking people. Seeing Fred enter the room with Rita, you could see that the young individuals filling the chairs enjoyed having Fred as a superior. Everyone corrected their posture, drew in their chairs, and settled their ears. "Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I thought I had man flu for a moment. Turned out it was just a sneeze," Fred said, with a cheeky grin. He didn't have to wait for laughter or larger grins, as the whole room seemed to light up that little bit brighter with everyone's expressions. Rita, however, held an expression of high brows and a pairing of raised lips, to which everyone also chuckled at. "Right, everyone, jokes aside, we have a busy day ahead of us," Rita said, shifting the tone of the room to a more work-orientated one. "Robbins, what have you got for us?" Rita asked, looking at a sharp young African man. Robbins slowly stood up, and looking around him to ensure himself everyone was ready. Fred watched him gently make his way to the white pull-down projector background, and then take a clicker from Rita, who had reached across the smaller table in the upper left corner of the room. Taking the clicker, Robbins then reached into his patterned suit trousers and pulled out a small USB stick. Plugging it in the small Macintosh computer, he set up his small presentation. As Robbins was continuing his presentation on the structure of next week's magazine, Fred saw it. His eyes widened, his pulse churned with the cold sweat encompassing his body. Fred placed his hands over his mouth in a manner to which someone watching him would think he is either thinking or hiding regurgitation of puke. He couldn't believe it. Keeping his condition as less visible as possible, he waited patiently for the moment. "And now onto the moon," Robbins was saying. This is it," Fred thought to himself. Robbins showed a poster that was different from the one Fred had come across at the station. It was less alluring to him, but the power and presence of the moon in the poster still had this unusual hold on him. Inside the very detailed image of the moon was a faded image of a face, a woman's face, a woman he did not recognize. They say she is a rabbit princess. We gave her description to an artificial intelligence drawing machine and it come up with this, said Robbins. Robbins pressed the clicker, and Fred felt this indescribable feeling. It was a mixture of pain and a tickling sensation around the chest, a fog and lightness of the head, a twitch in his fingers, an emptiness in his knees, and a small gasp of breath he had never inhaled before. He felt like looking at her. Looking at that image of her any longer would cause him to collapse. So he turned and faced the city, looking out the windows. "Fred?" Rita said with a confused expression, but a worried hand lurched mid-air towards his direction. "Brilliant work, Robbins. The magazine comes out on Saturday, right, Rita?" asked Fred, totally ignoring Rita's confused and worried actions. Rita's face shifted into a common expression and replied, "Should be Monday. Knowing you, though, it would be Saturday." "The event is on the Thursday, right? Anyone know?" Fred asked the room. A petite young blonde lady, 2 seats away from Robbins, slowly got up and gestured to speak with a small hand raising above her head. "You okay, Nancy?" Rita asked. "I'm fine, thank you, Rita." In answer to Fred's question, the event is tomorrow around 10 in the morning, our time, and 7 in the evening, Tokyo time, replied Nancy, in a manner lacking self-confidence in her answer. Fred there and then made a decision. "We're going to Tokyo," he said bluntly. "Okay, what?" Rita replied, going from one expression to the next, in a carousel of emotions. "We should see the event," said Fred. "What do you think we pay travel correspondents for?" Rita retorted. "Designers and thinkers should see this for themselves. And besides, we have had a really good year. This team deserves a small getaway, and quite frankly, I think I do too." Fred responded, knowing and feeling his ability to communicate coming in at the right time. "Are you okay?" Rita asked, placing a hand on his forehead. Fred took Rita's hand gently and softly into his, and slowly raised it to waist level. He then looked her deeply in the eyes and responded with a soft smile. "I'm fine. Do you trust me, Rita?" Rita was caught off guard and blushed a crimson red. Gently pulling her hand away and raising her glasses with it, she began walking to the conference room door. "Of course I do, you simpleton. I better get Sheila to book the tickets," Rita replied, leaving the room. Fred's inner thoughts were screaming, "Yes! Yes, yes, yes!" His Tuesday had completely turned around, and now, of all things, he was going to Japan to see a moon. Well, not the moon, an event. The moon, however, was quite important to him. From an outside perspective, Fred's obsessive behaviour with the moon would seem borderline insane. From an outside perspective, Fred's obsessive behaviour with the moon would seem borderline insane, at the least, but for those more acquainted with a more lonely setting, I sincerely hope that you will allow Fred's story to unfold.